What grows underground is brown on the outside but comes in a rainbow of colors. Garden-grown turmeric can be cultivated from store-bought or certified rhizomes. And this tropical root medicine is adapted to growing in a variety of climates. You can grow turmeric in pots or cultivate this buried treasure with in-ground plantings. But growing the golden spice requires time and a few key details. In this video, I'll go over the growth stages, techniques for pre-sprouting, and the basics of planting and harvesting. So let's take a look at this superfood that can be grown in your backyard, on a balcony, or a patio. I'm Scott from New Garden Road, always out here to inform, inspire, and elevate you. Encouraging biodiversity and restoring habitat is my mission, one garden at a time. I want to start off by discussing the growth stages for turmeric, and the same framework will apply when growing ginger or galanga. It's important to note that I'm in Austin, Texas, and essentially what I'm doing is I'm growing a tropical perennial as a temperate annual. In the tropics, these crops don't go dormant, they simply keep on growing. But here, if we want to grow them in perpetuity, we have to offer them some protection or harvest prior to the winter. So what I've done is create a graphic here to illustrate the different growth stages, the general seasonality that you can reference for that, as well as the column on the right, which refers to the months of the year, which are specific to my Texas garden, but would likely apply to much of the southern United States. This will, however, vary based on your location. First off, there is the sprouting stage, which will naturally occur in late winter into the spring. If you've got these outside and they're protected, they will respond to the increase in ground temperatures, and they will rapidly begin to grow leaves and roots from the spring into the summer. After that, it's rhizome growth, which is essentially what we're after, and this begins to occur late in the summer. Rhizomes will begin to mature and toughen up as we get into the fall, and then rhizome dormancy will begin sometime in the winter, weather dependent. Now that we have a good sense of timing around the growth and development for the turmeric that we want to grow, let's talk about pre-sprouting. Why is this so important? Well, essentially, if you want to get a good yield, an early start is key because you're going to have to grow them over a long season, 5, 6, 8 months or more. And if they haven't sprouted, leafed out, then it will take time for them to do so. If you have a shorter growing season, that would mean you wouldn't get as much growth and development. So that's why this is a key factor in the process. Now you can get your rhizomes from the store. That's what I did initially, and these were fully dormant. I didn't go through the process of pre-sprouting because I wasn't aware at that point in time, but I did get some turmeric growing, and my first initial harvest, they were really minuscule, but they did grow. And ultimately what I did was I kept growing them. I replanted them and they got bigger. This season, I'm growing 3 varieties of turmeric, 2 of which I purchased from Southern Exposure Seed Exchange, and they arrived pre-sprouted. So when I got them, they had some noticeable white nodules on the rhizome, and you could tell that they were going to begin to produce leaves pretty quickly. But the 3rd variety that I have is from the initial lineage that I got here in Austin at the Wheatsville Co-op, and they were already sprouting as a result of the warm temperatures that were coming on for the season. So in both cases, I already had some sprouted turmeric. But what if you need to sprout yours at home? How do you do that? Essentially, you have to mimic a warm seasonal environment like they naturally sprout in, often indoors, but you could try doing this outside in something like a cold frame. Otherwise, inside in a moist potting mix to start off with. You can use a heat mat that can encourage some sustained warmth. You can employ a humidome to keep in some of the humidity and the warmth that you've got going on there. So while it's important to start off with an evenly moist potting mix, which encourages a humid environment, you don't want to tip the scales. And this process takes several weeks, so if you have too much moisture in that mix, it could be encouraging mold growth, or they may just begin to rot. Now there is an alternate way you could do this, similar to how we start potatoes. In my Austin, Texas garden, I can plant potatoes in early February. It's still cold, we could have some frost that occur, but I plant my potatoes deep, right? I cover them up with some soil. You could go the same route in growing turmeric and just let it naturally respond to the warming soil as the season goes forward, and that would also protect them from any ensuing frost by keeping them covered with generally around 6 to 8 inches of soil. Just let them do their thing, and you have to be patient and wait. And as I grow them in containers, that's essentially my approach. I'll protect them in the winter through their dormancy, and then I'll allow the seasonal warmth to push them into sprouting naturally. Now, before we get into planting your sprouted turmeric, I'm going to skip to the end and I want to talk about harvesting. First of all, you're going to be targeting late fall, and this needs to occur prior to a hard freeze. The reason being is if you're growing them in containers, they will be more susceptible to freeze damage, or if you're in a really cold winter climate, they could essentially rot from freeze damage. While I've primarily been cultivating turmeric as an experiment in my garden, I also intended to grow out the rhizome stock so that I could propagate it and grow it for food and medicine. So what I'm going to show you is my harvest after 2 years of growth. And I didn't harvest until May of this year, May of 2024. I really wanted to get in here and harvest my turmeric before the season got started, but things just didn't work out for me in that way, and they had already sprouted and started leafing out. These have been protected in my high tunnel structure where I am now. It's currently covered in shade cloth. This is where I grow them out seasonally because we're under full sun here and they need some buffer from that full sun. Turmeric is not going to appreciate full sun in really hot climates, so that's an important factor. But what I want to point to is that I did protect them over the winter and they weren't subject to the coldest of temperatures. I tried to start working from the outside and gently feel my way around for the rhizomes because you can break them and you just never know exactly where they are. A little bit of excavation on the light side until I got my bearings, and then gently started to loosen them. Over a little bit of working time, they'll start to come out of there. And at this point, turmeric isn't something that you're going to be curing. I went ahead and rinsed them off with some water. That really helped the roots to begin to separate, and I was better able to distinguish between the turmeric that I wanted to keep as a harvest and the rest I propagated into containers and a potting mix, and they have started to grow really well. And if you want the best and healthiest rhizomes that you possibly can, you want to feed them. I like the Neptune's Harvest. This is a 2-4-1 fertilizer. That middle number corresponds to phosphorus, which is great for flowers, fruits, and roots. And this rhizome here is very similar to a root. It's going to store a lot of energy, so we'll be feeding it with that specific fertilizer. I've been using it for over a decade in my garden. This is a family-owned business that's been around for a long time. It's a tried and true product. This company is rooted in the commercial fishing industry, so what they decided to do after they fillet the fish, they turn them into fertilizer. So I think this is a really regenerative, sustainable approach, something that I appreciate in principle, and I've got to say the results speak for themselves. One of the primary advantages to growing turmeric in containers and growing it at home like this is because you get that cycle going. You don't really have to go through the pre-sprouting process necessarily. Now, I'm in Texas, so it just doesn't get cold enough for long enough. We just have a warmer soil throughout the year, and they'll naturally begin to break their dormancy as soon as we start to warm up, generally sometime in mid-February. So those are specifics to me in my Austin, Texas garden where I'm growing turmeric. But if you've started from scratch and you've got them sprouted indoors, you're going to be waiting for soil temperatures in the 75 to 85 degree Fahrenheit range. And to bring them outside to continue growing, the daytime temperatures need to be 60 degrees Fahrenheit and above. But you can totally start growing them indoors in containers if you live in a cooler climate. For me in Central Texas, this is very similar to growing tomatoes. We have a short window that's ideal for growing and producing, beautiful tomatoes. So you get them started around the beginning of the year. You got to keep them inside, keep them protected. You have to dodge those cool nights. But then you get them outside and they're raging, right? You sometimes are planting plants that are 2 or 3 feet tall, and then they just take off like a rocket. Ideally, you want to plant your rhizomes 10 inches apart. I've grown them in containers for years, and I can tell you I've grown them much closer together than that, but that does result in them potentially competing, not sizing up adequately. But for me, what I'm trying to grow is rhizome stock, and this year I came up with some pretty good rhizomes that I've got planted out here. Some of the smaller ones I did put together in a pot that was essentially 12 inches in diameter, while some of the larger ones ones I planted singularly in the same size container, and I can tell that the foliage is much larger for the larger rhizome. So they already have a lot of energy to draw on, and that should give them an adequate space to grow and develop over the course of the season. But if you're going to be planting these in the ground, it would be best to plant them 10 inches apart or even more. Probably 10 to 18 inches would be a good range to consider. As those rhizomes begin to grow and develop into late summer, you want to assure that they stay covered. So you might want to dirt them up with some compost, or if you've got them in a container, check them on a regular basis, and you can add more potting mix or mulch. Now check out more awesome gardening videos on my channel, like this video, and follow New Garden Road for weekly content. You can grow your own turmeric. Keep it organic.